Lord, we implore your mercy. Send us the rain. When I opened my eyes, my mother shouted, "It's a miracle!" The story you're about to hear is a true account. The names of the people and places have been changed to protect their privacy. If you believe in miracles or have experienced one, leave your opinion in the comments and subscribe. Look, I'm not much for talking about these things, you know? But what happened that summer, well, that changed everything for me. I was about 12 years old at the time, and our farm was going through a terrible drought. I'd never seen anything like it. Every day, I would wake up and look out the window, hoping to see some cloud, anything, but nothing. Just that relentless blue sky, day after day. At first, we even joked about it, you know? "Hey, Dad, I think God forgot to turn on the sprinklers up there." I'd say. Dad would just give a weak smile and ruffle my hair. But as the weeks passed, the joke turned into a nightmare. Our crops, which we had cared for with so much love, started to wither. It was like watching a friend die slowly, and there was nothing we could do. The corn, which should have been tall and green, was all yellow and stunted. It was heartbreaking to see. And the livestock? Oh God, that broke my heart. I went every day to see the animals, and they looked at me with those sad eyes, mooing with thirst. We rationed the water we had, but it wasn't enough. I remember one night, I was coming back from the barn and heard a strange noise. It was old Joe, our prized bull, collapsed on the ground, breathing heavily. "Dad, Mom, come quick," I yelled, panicked. The three of us ran over, and it took all our strength to lift Joe. Dad stayed out there all night, taking care of him. The next morning, Joe was on his feet, but weak. That's when I truly realized. This wasn't just a passing drought. This was a fight for survival. The bills started piling up on the kitchen table. I pretended not to see them, but I noticed how Mom bit her lip every time she opened an envelope. One night, I couldn't take it anymore and listened from behind their bedroom door. "Martha, if it doesn't rain in the next few days, we're going to have to sell part of the land," I heard Dad say, his voice so tired it didn't even sound like his own. "No, John. This farm has been in your family for generations," Mom replied, her voice breaking. "And what else can we do? Look outside. There's nothing alive out there." The silence that followed was deafening. I went back to my room, feeling small and useless. That night, I cried softly into my pillow, praying for a miracle I no longer believed in. The next morning, the sky was still blue, not a cloud in sight. But something had changed. The air felt heavier, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. I looked at my parents' tired faces at breakfast and made a decision. If God really existed, He would have to hear me. I would do something, even if it was the last thing I did on this farm. That afternoon, the heat was so intense that even the cicadas had stopped singing. I was in the barn, trying to fix an old water pump, more to distract myself than because I believed it would make any difference. That's when I heard Mom calling me from inside. "Son, come here, please." I put down the screwdriver and went inside, sweat running down my forehead. The air in the house was heavy, suffocating. I found Mom in her room. She was kneeling beside the bed, holding that old rosary Grandma had given her before she passed. "Mom, are you okay?" I asked, a little scared. I had never seen her like that. She looked up at me, and I swear I'll never forget the expression on her face. She had tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. It was something else, something powerful. "Son," she said, her voice firm despite the tears, "come pray with me." I stood in the doorway, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to run. Another part wanted to believe that this might make a difference. "Mom," I started, feeling a lump in my throat. "What's the point? We've prayed so much. God doesn't care about us." The words came out more bitter than I intended. Mom looked at me for a while, as if she were seeing through me. "Come here," she said, extending her hand. I hesitated, but in the end, I went. I sat next to her on the hard floor. "Son," she began, taking my hands in hers, "do you remember the time you fell from the barn and broke your arm?" I nodded, remembering the pain. "Do you remember how much it hurt? How you thought you'd never be able to play, ride your bike, swim in the lake again?" "I remember," I murmured. But your arm healed, right? It took time. It hurt, but it healed. And do you know why? I shook my head, not understanding where she was going with this. Because we didn't give up. We took care of it, did what the doctor said, and believed it would get better. That's how it is with everything in life, son. Sometimes things seem impossible, too painful. But it's precisely in those moments that we need to have faith. But Mom, I argued, feeling tears welling up, this is different. We can't make it rain. She squeezed my hands. No, we can't. But God can. And it's in the darkest moments that our faith is truly tested. It's easy to have faith when everything is going well. The hard part is keeping the faith when it seems like all is lost. I stayed silent, Mom's words echoing in my head. She always had this way of speaking that made everything seem possible. Look, she continued, I know it's hard to believe right now, but let's try one more time. Let's ask for a miracle. What do we have to lose? I looked at her, into those eyes full of a certainty I didn't understand. And suddenly, I felt ashamed. Ashamed of having doubted, of having lost hope so easily. Okay, Mom, I said quietly, let's pray. She smiled, that smile that always made everything seem better. I knelt beside her, feeling a little silly, but also, I don't know, like something important was about to happen. Mom began to pray out loud, her words growing stronger with each moment. Lord, we beg for your mercy. Send us the rain, save our farm, our livelihood, our dreams. At first, I just repeated her words, feeling uncomfortable. But little by little, something strange began to happen. It was as if each word took on a life of its own, resonating not just in the room, but inside me. Heavenly Father, Mom's voice trembled with emotion, we know you can do the impossible. Just as you multiplied the loaves and fishes, we ask that you multiply the dewdrops into abundant rain. I closed my eyes tightly, Mom's words pounding in my head. Suddenly, I found myself speaking too, the words flowing out without me even thinking. Please, God. I heard my own voice, shaky but gaining strength. We need this rain. Don't let our farm die. Please. I don't know how long we stayed there, kneeling on that hard floor, our voices blending into a desperate plea. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to stand still. And then, very faint at first, I heard a sound. A sound I hadn't heard in so long that I had almost forgotten what it was like. I opened my eyes, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would explode. Mom, I whispered, barely daring to believe it. Do you hear that? Mom opened her eyes slowly, as if coming out of a trance. For a moment, we stood there, barely breathing, trying to catch that almost imperceptible sound. Son, she whispered, do you think? We didn't finish the sentence. We jumped up and ran to the window. The sky was still blue, but on the horizon, almost invisible, a few dark clouds had started to form. Mom, look! I shouted, pointing. Are those rain clouds? Mom squeezed my hand, her eyes shining in a way I had never seen before. Let's go outside, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. We ran out of the house, forgetting to even put on our shoes. The ground was hot beneath our feet, the dry grass crunching with each step. We stopped in the middle of the yard, staring up at the sky as if our lives depended on it. The clouds were moving closer, slowly but steadily. It was like watching a miracle unfold before our eyes. Mom began praying again, her voice now filled with fierce hope. Lord, please, bring this rain to us. Save our land, save our lives. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, holding her hand, my eyes fixed on the sky. The wind began to blow, bringing a smell I hadn't sensed in months. The smell of rain. Dad! I suddenly shouted, remembering. We have to call Dad. But before we could do anything, we heard the truck pulling in. Dad had returned from town, where he'd gone to try and negotiate another loan at the bank. He got out of the car, looking older and more tired than ever. But when he saw us standing in the middle of the yard, staring at the sky, his expression changed. What are you? He began. But then he looked up and saw the clouds approaching. John, Mom called, her voice full of an emotion I had never heard before. Come here.
Now.
Dad walked toward us, his steps slow, as if he were afraid of breaking some spell. When he got close, I saw that his eyes were filled with tears. "Martha," he said, his voice hoarse, "do you think?" "Sure." Mom hushed, taking his hand. "Let's pray." All of us together, and there we stood, the three of us, holding hands, looking up at the sky that was getting darker and darker. Mom started the prayer, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Heavenly Father, we thank you for hearing our prayers. Please pour your grace upon our land." Dad joined her, his deep voice blending with hers in perfect harmony. "Lord, forgive our lack of faith. Show us your power and your mercy." And then, without even realizing it, I was praying too. "Please, God, we need this rain. Save our farm, save our family." The wind grew stronger, tousling our hair, bringing the scent of wet earth. The clouds now covered almost the entire sky, dark and heavy with promise. Suddenly, lightning streaked across the sky, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the ground. We all jumped, but we didn't let go of each other's hands. "It's coming," Dad murmured, his voice breaking. "It's really coming." And then, as if our words had finally reached the heavens, it happened. The first drop fell, hitting my face like a blessing. Then another, and another. "It's raining," I shouted, unable to believe what was happening. "Mom, Dad, it's raining." Within seconds, the drizzle turned into a downpour, drenching us. But no one moved. We stood there, holding hands, letting the water wash away months of worry and despair. Mom began to laugh and cry at the same time, a sound of pure joy that I had never heard before. Dad hugged her, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. And me? I opened my arms and spun around, feeling the raindrops on my face, on my skin, washing away all the doubt and fear. It was as if each drop was a tiny miracle, proof that the impossible could happen. The rain kept pouring down, strong and steady, soaking the dry earth. We could almost hear the ground sighing in relief, drinking in every drop as if it were the last. I don't know how long we stayed there, letting the rain embrace us. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to lose its meaning. When we finally went inside, soaked and shivering, but with smiles that seemed to light up the world, something had changed. It wasn't just the rain outside. It was something inside us. That night, we slept to the sound of rain tapping on the roof, a sound that had become almost strange from how rare it was. But before I slept, I stayed up for a while, looking out the window, watching the lightning light up the sky. "Thank you," I whispered, not really knowing to whom. Maybe to God, maybe to the universe, maybe just to myself. Thank you for showing us that miracles still happen. And for the first time in months, I slept with a smile on my face, dreaming of green fields and skies full of promise. I woke up the next morning with a strange feeling. For a moment, I stayed in bed, trying to figure out what was different. And then I remembered. The rain. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The sky was still gray, but the rain had stopped. The air was fresh, filled with that smell of wet earth I hadn't felt for months. Outside, the world seemed to have completely changed overnight. I ran downstairs, almost tripping over my own feet. I found Mom and Dad in the kitchen, both with expressions I'd never seen before. A mix of joy, relief, and something that looked almost like fear. "Good morning, champ," Dad said, ruffling my hair. "Did you sleep well?" I nodded, still half speechless. "Can we go outside and see?" I asked, barely able to contain my excitement. Mom smiled, that smile that always made everything seem better. "Of course. But first, breakfast. We're going to need energy today." I ate my breakfast so fast I almost choked. As soon as we finished, the three of us went outside together, as if none of us wanted to face whatever awaited us alone. The first step outside was indescribable. The ground, which had been hard and cracked yesterday, was now soft under our feet. Small puddles reflected the cloudy sky like mirrors scattered across the yard. "Look," Mom exclaimed, pointing to a flower bed near the fence. There, where only dry dirt had been yesterday, Tiny green shoots were now sprouting. It's the seeds we planted last month. They're alive. Dad knelt beside the flower bed, gently touching the small sprouts with trembling fingers. It's a miracle, he murmured, his voice breaking. A true miracle. We walked around the property, each step revealing a new surprise. The trees that had looked almost dead yesterday now had a different glow in their leaves. The small stream that runs through our land, which had been nearly dry, was now bubbling happily. When we reached the cornfield, we were left speechless. The plants, which had been wilted and yellow yesterday, now stood tall, their leaves a vibrant green. How is this possible? I asked, looking at Mom and Dad. They were almost dead yesterday. Dad shook his head, a disbelieving smile on his face. I don't know, son. Sometimes nature just needs a chance. We continued our walk, reaching the pasture where the cattle were. The animals, which had seemed so sad and downcast yesterday, were now happily grazing on the newly revived grass. Old Joe, the bull we'd nearly lost, raised his head as we approached, letting out a low moo that sounded almost cheerful. Hey, Joe, I said, walking up to the fence. Look at you, all lively. We stayed there for a while, just watching the animals, feeling the cool air on our faces. It was as if the world had been reborn overnight. Suddenly, we heard the sound of an engine. It was Mr. Thompson, our neighbor, arriving in his old truck. John, Martha, he shouted, jumping out of the truck before even turning off the engine. Have you seen? Have you seen what's happened? He ran over to us, his eyes wide with excitement. I've never seen anything like it. My fields, it's like they've been blessed. And it's not just here, no. They say it's rained all over the county. Dad and Mr. Thompson started talking excitedly about the rain, about the crops, about how this changed everything. Mom stood listening, a serene smile on her face. I wandered off a bit, walking to the edge of our small pond. Yesterday, it had been almost dry. Today, the water shimmered under the cloudy sky, full of life. As I watched the water, something caught my eye. There, on the shore, where only dry mud had been yesterday, tiny flowers were now sprouting. Flowers I had never seen before. Mom, Dad, I called out excitedly. Come see this. They came running, worried by the tone of my voice. But when they saw the flowers, they stopped, mouths agape. What kind of flowers are these? I asked, kneeling down to take a closer look. They were delicate, with petals so deeply blue they seemed almost unreal. Mom knelt beside me, gently touching one of the flowers. I don't know, son. I've never seen anything like them. Dad frowned, thoughtful. Neither have I. And I know every inch of this land. Mr. Thompson joined us, letting out a low whistle of surprise. Well, you don't see this every day. We stayed there, staring at those mysterious flowers, each of us lost in our own thoughts. It was as if those tiny blue flowers were the final proof that something truly extraordinary had happened. You know, Mom finally said, her voice soft, they say that after every storm, there's a rainbow. Maybe these flowers are our rainbow. I looked at her, at Dad, at Mr. Thompson, at the sky, still cloudy but now full of promise, at the fields that had been dead yesterday, but were now pulsing with life. And in that moment, I understood what Mom meant about faith. It wasn't about blind belief. It was about hope, about not giving up, even when everything seemed lost. Because sometimes, when you least expect it, the impossible happens. In the days that followed, it was as if the farm had taken on a life of its own. Each morning brought a new surprise, a new miracle to witness. It was as if nature was dancing, celebrating its rebirth, and we were the privileged spectators of the show. Soon, in the first week after the miraculous rain, we noticed that the mysterious blue flowers weren't alone. Other species began to sprout, all unknown to us. There were flowers in vibrant colors that seemed to glow under the sun, others that changed color throughout the day, and some that only bloomed at dusk, releasing a sweet perfume that filled the night air. Dad, always the practical farmer, was intrigued. Martha, he said one night, scratching his head, do you think we should tell someone about these flowers? This isn't normal. Mom smiled with that enigmatic air of hers. And since when are miracles normal, John? Let's enjoy this blessing. I spent hours exploring the farm, discovering new patches of those magical flowers. I started giving them names. The blue ones that came first I called Tears of the Sky. There were purple ones that seemed to dance with the wind I named Twilight Waltzes, and tiny white ones that only appeared early in the morning I named Morning Sighs. But it wasn't just the flowers. The animals on the farm seemed to have been touched by that magic as well. The hens began laying eggs with shells in different colors: blue, green, even some with golden speckles. The cow's milk was sweeter and creamier than ever. One morning, while helping Dad in the barn, we heard a neigh that we didn't recognize. We ran to the pasture, and there was our mare, Estrella, with a newborn foal by her side. But this wasn't an ordinary foal. Its coat was a brilliant golden color, almost as if it had been dusted with stardust. "Dad," I whispered, amazed, "have you ever seen anything like this?" Dad shook his head, his eyes wide with wonder. "Never, son. This is extraordinary." We named the foal Comet, and soon it became the attraction of the farm. It grew strong and healthy, running through the pastures with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. As the days passed, word about the changes on our farm began to spread. At first, it was just neighbors coming by to check out the rumors they had heard. But soon, people from all over the region started showing up. I remember one Sunday, about 3 weeks after the miraculous rain. We were getting ready to go to church when we heard the sound of cars approaching. We stepped outside to see what was going on, and were left speechless. A line of cars stretched down the dirt road, all heading toward our farm. "John," Mom said, grabbing Dad's arm, "what are we going to do?" Dad took a deep breath, adjusted his hat, and said, "Well, we're going to welcome them. It's the least we can do." And so it began. People arrived in groups, whole families, all wanting to see the miraculous flowers, the golden foal, the colorful eggs from our hens. They brought picnics, cameras, even film crews. At first, it was a bit overwhelming. We had never seen so many people on our farm. But soon we realized that everyone came with respect, with a kind of reverence. Many cried when they saw the flowers, moved by something they couldn't explain. An elderly lady approached me while I was showing a group the Tears of the Sky. She took my hand, her eyes shining with emotion. "Young man," she said, her voice trembling, "do you know that you are living through a miracle?" I nodded, unsure of what to say. She continued, "Never lose faith. What has happened here is a reminder that there is more to this world than we can see or understand." Her words stayed with me, resonating in my mind in the days that followed. As more and more people visited, I began to see our farm through their eyes, not just as the place where I grew up, but as a symbol of hope, of possibilities, of miracles. Mom and Dad had to quickly adjust to this new reality. We improvised parking areas, put up signs to guide visitors, and even set up a small stand where we sold lemonade and homemade cookies. One evening, after the last visitor had left, we sat on the porch, exhausted but happy. The sun was setting, painting the sky with colors that seemed to reflect the magical flowers scattered across the fields. "Do you think this will last?" I asked, looking at Mom and Dad. Mom smiled, that smile that always made me feel like everything would be all right. "I don't know, dear, but I think it doesn't matter how long it lasts. What matters is what we do with this gift while we have it." Dad nodded, wrapping his arm around her shoulders. "Your mother is right. All of this is more than we could have ever dreamed. It's our responsibility to take care of it, to share it with others." We sat in silence for a moment, watching the stars begin to appear in the sky. The air was perfumed with the scent of the evening flowers, and in the distance, we could hear comets softly neighing. At that moment, I felt a peace I had never experienced before. I understood that, no matter what the future held, we had been blessed with something extraordinary. And that blessing wasn't just for us, it was meant to be shared, to bring hope and joy to everyone who came to our farm. As the weeks turned into months, our farm continued to be a beacon of hope and wonder for everyone who visited. The miraculous flowers kept blooming, Comet grew more majestic by the day, and it seemed we had found a new purpose in life. But it was one autumn afternoon, almost 6 months after that miraculous rain, when the real surprise occurred. I was helping Dad fix the fence in the southern pasture when a car we didn't recognize pulled into the property. It wasn't unusual to have unexpected visitors by this time, but something about this car, a shiny black sedan, obviously expensive, made Dad frown. 2 men in suits got out of the car, looking around with a mix of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite identify. "Can I help you?" Dad asked, taking off his hat and walking over to them. The taller man, with gray hair and thin-framed glasses, smiled in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good afternoon. We're looking for Mr. John Miller. Is that you?" Dad nodded, cautious. "That's me. And you are?" "Oh, apologies for the lack of introduction," the man said, extending his hand. "I'm Dr. Robert Hartley from the State University. This is my colleague, Dr. James Peterson. We've come to talk about your fascinating farm." Something about the way he said fascinating made me uneasy. I exchanged a quick glance with Dad and saw that he felt the same. "Well," Dad said, "why don't we go inside? Martha just made fresh lemonade." As we walked towards the house, I noticed the 2 men were carefully observing everything, taking notes in a small notebook. Mom greeted them with her usual hospitality, but I could see the tension in her shoulders as she poured the lemonade. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," Dr. Hartley began after a few sips, "we're here representing a consortium of universities and biotech companies. We've heard about the extraordinary events on your farm, and, well, we're very interested." Dad leaned forward, his hands clasped. "Interested how?" Dr. Peterson cleared his throat. "To be direct, Mr. Miller, we believe what's happened here could be the key to revolutionary advancements in agriculture and medicine. These flowers, for instance," he pointed to a vase of tears of the sky on the table. "Our preliminary analyses suggest they contain compounds never before seen in nature." Mom held her breath. I felt my heart start to race. This didn't seem good. "What exactly are you proposing?" Dad asked, his voice firm. Dr. Hartley smiled again, that same smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We want to buy your farm, Mr. Miller. Turn it into a research facility. Of course, you would be generously compensated. We're prepared to offer a sum that would change your lives." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Mom and Dad, seeing the shock on their faces. And if we don't want to sell?" Mom finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Hartley's smile faltered for a moment. "Well, Mrs. Miller, I understand your hesitation, but you need to understand. What has happened here is bigger than you. It's potentially the discovery of the century. Think of the lives that could be saved, the famines that could be avoided. Also think," Dr. Peterson interrupted, "that if you don't cooperate, we might have to take other measures. After all, we can't allow something this important to be left in the hands of mere farmers, can we?" The veiled threat hung in the air like a dark cloud. I felt anger rising inside me. Who were they to come here and try to take away our farm, our miracle? Dad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "I think it's time for you to leave," he said, his voice colder than I had ever heard it. The 2 men exchanged glances. "Mr. Miller, be reasonable," Dr. Hartley began, but Dad cut him off. "No, you need to be reasonable. This farm is not for sale. What happened here was a miracle, not something to be exploited in laboratories. Now, please leave." After they left, a heavy silence fell over the house. Finally, Mom spoke. "John, what are we going to do? They'll come back, you know that?" Dad sighed, running his hand over his face. "I know, Martha, but we can't give up. All of this," he gestured broadly, taking in the whole farm, "it's not ours to sell. It's a gift, a responsibility." In the weeks that followed, things got tense. More men in suits showed up, some offering money, others making veiled threats. We started noticing strange cars parked on the road, watching the farm. But then something incredible happened. News of the attempts to buy the farm spread, and suddenly, we weren't alone anymore. Neighbors, visitors who had become friends, people from all over the country who had heard our story, they all began to show up. We received letters, emails, calls of support. People volunteered to stand guard at the farm, Lawyers offered to represent us pro bono. One night, I looked out the window and saw a line of cars and trucks parked along our fence, with people camping out, determined to protect our land. It was in that moment that I truly understood the impact of what had happened on our farm. It wasn't just about miraculous flowers or extraordinary animals. It was about hope, about believing in something bigger than ourselves. One night, sitting on the porch like so many times before, Dad took my hand in Mom's. "You know," he said softly, "when we prayed for rain that day, I never imagined we'd receive all this. But now I see that the real miracle wasn't the flowers or the rain. It was how this touched people, how it brought everyone together." Mom nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "And that's why we have to protect this, isn't it? Not just for us, but for everyone who believes." I looked out at the moonlit fields, the flowers glowing softly in the night, the people camped along our fence. And I knew, with a certainty that came from the depths of my heart, that no matter what came next, we'd be ready. Because the real miracle wasn't just in our land, but in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by our story. And that, I realized, was something no money could buy, no threat could take away. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. The miracle that began with a simple prayer for rain had transformed into something much greater. It was a story of faith, of community, of standing firm against those who wanted to exploit something sacred. And as long as I lived, I would do everything I could to protect this legacy, to ensure that the miracle of our farm would continue to inspire hope and wonder for many years to come.